Welcome back to the channel, and my dear students, we are going to discuss about plant reproduction today. This topic is well supportive to the students of IGCSE, GCSE and GCE O levels. Plants are capable of reproducing sexually as well as asexually. But in today's segment, we will be discussing about sexual reproduction in plants. For sexual reproduction, plants rely on flowers because flowers are taken as reproductive organs of the plants. Within flowers, there are structures that are likely to produce gametes that are involved in sexual reproduction in plants. So, in order to proceed with the sexual reproduction in plants, we will discuss about flower structure. Part of the shoot where the flower is going, that is known as flower stalk, and on the flower stalk there is a base. Over that base a complete flower resides. This is known as receptacle. Now flower has got different components. Right on the base of the flower we find small leaflet like structures that could be thick or thin, that could be brown or green, that could be fused or separate, that could be smooth or spiny, but circling all around the base of the flower. These are protective in structure and these are known as sepals. As the most important component of the flower is ovary, and that is settled right on top of the base of the flower. So in order to protect it, we have got sepals circling all around the base of the flower. Then what we have colorful petals circling all the inside of the flower. These petals are colorful leaflet-like structures. They do have any other color but not green. And in different species of plants, flower petals could be of different colors. These petals are sportive in the process of pollination, and these are protective in function as well. These petals are actually protecting the vital components of the flower, and these vital components include stamen, that are the male parts of the flower. A stamen includes a filament, and above the filament or on top of the filament there is present a sac-like structure that is known as anther. This anther holds inside male gametes, and these male gametes are known as pollens or pollen grains. In the typical flower diagram, what we have right in the middle of these stamens, we have got a vase-like structure that is actually representing the female reproductive part of the flower, and this is known as carpel. Carpel has got a base on top that is known as stigma, and stigma is the one that receives the male gametes known as pollens. Then there is a neck-like part that is known as style, and there is a swollen base that is known as ovary. All these three components collectively make carpel. It is also known as pistil. Inside the ovary, there is present a sac-like structure that is known as ovule, and inside the ovule, we can find female gamete as ovum, or we can find endosperm nucleus as well. This is the generalized diagram, generalized labeling of a flower. But remember, we can have two different types of plants. One is known as monosexual plants, and the other is known as bisexual plants. Monosexual plants are the ones that produce flowers of two different types. Means they have male flowers or they can have female flowers on the same plant body. If the flowers contain only stamens but not carpel, so these flowers are known as male flowers. And the other flowers that grow on these plants, if they have only carpel but no stamen, so they are taken as female flowers. And the well-known example for this is corn. In corn plant, flowers are produced in two tiers. On the middle tier, we have got female flowers that only contain carpel but no stamen. And on the top tier, male flowers are produced that contain only stamen but no carpel at all. Now, in these two different types of flowers, gametes are ripening up at different times. So, these plants are majorly focused at cross pollination. These are majorly focused at cross pollination. There are certain flowers, certain plants that are bisexual plants because their flowers contain both stamen and carpel within one flower. So these are known as bisexual flowers. Sunflower is a well-known example of it. Now, pollen grains are the male gametes. You can say pollen grains contain a nucleus that is known as the male gamete nucleus, and that needs to fertilize the female gamete nucleus present inside the ovule. For that purpose, a male gamete nucleus means pollen grain needs to travel from anther to the stigma of the carpel. Next, what we are going to discuss now in proceeding of sexual reproduction in plants, that is the pollination. Pollination process is actually the transfer of pollen from anther to the stigma of the flower. This is known as pollination. Considering the agent that support the pollination process to complete, we have got two different types of pollinations. Like pollen grains do not have any locomotory structures. They do not have any wings. They do not have any legs that they can move by themselves. So they need agents that they can travel from anther to the stigma. If pollen grains are supported by the insects and they travel while attached with the body of the insect and they ultimately reach the stigma, so this pollination process is known as insect pollination. And if pollen grains happen to travel along with the winds and they reach the stigma, so this type of pollination is known as insect pollination. So there are certain plants on this planet that are naturally adopted for insect pollination or for wind pollination, so they are named accordingly. But remember, pollination process is only completed when the pollen grains happen to reach to the stigma of the right species flower, right species plant. Otherwise, pollination process would not stand complete. Considering the travel, considering the journey of the pollen grains, whether it remains restricted to one plant or whether it moves from one plant to another plant, so then again we have got two types of pollination process. One is known as self-pollination and the other is known as cross-pollination. During self-pollination, pollen grains travel from the anther to the stigma of the same flower, or they travel from the anther to the stigma of another flower but on the same plant. So in this case, pollen grains do not cross the plant boundaries. Now, whether they are being supported by winds or they are being supported by insects, but pollen grains reach the stigma of the same flower or they reach to the stigma of another flower but on the same plant, so this will be taken as self-pollination. But if pollen grains travel from the anther of a flower at one plant to the stigma of the flower of another plant, but of the same species, this will be taken as cross-pollination. So this will be taken as cross-pollination. So in cross-pollination, pollen grains travel from the anther of a flower at one plant and they happen to fall on the stigma of the flower of another plant. So this is known as cross-pollination. But remember, for cross-pollination to take place, both the plants should be of the same species. If the plants are of two different species, so we will consider the pollination process incomplete because it will not further proceed. Now, earlier we discussed about insect pollination and wind pollination. And I told you earlier that certain plants, they are adopted for insect pollination and certain plants, they are adopted for wind pollination. So their flower structure is designed naturally accordingly. So we are going to discuss about the adaptations of the flowers in sport of insect pollination or wind pollination. First of all, we are going to discuss about adaptations of an insect pollinated flower. As these insect pollinated flowers need to attract insects, So they are provided with colorful petals, brightly colored petals that are attracting the insects. And these flowers are fragrant as well, means they are releasing a pleasant odor into the surrounding. So that is also an attraction. When these insects happen to reach to these flowers, so there must be another incentive for these insects, and that incentive is actually in the form of a nectar. A nectar is a sugar rich fluid that is produced by nectaries at the base of the ovaries in these flowers. This nectar is used by these insects as food. This is the same nectar butterflies and the wasps and the bees they consume, and later we get honey out of it. So insects need to visit these flowers in order to take that nectar as their diet, as their essential diet. When they land on the petals, the nectar guides present on the petals guide them to reach the base of the ovary where they can drink that nectar. But while they are moving down towards the base of the ovary, they are brushing around the anthers of the stamen. Within the anthers, large spiky pollen grains are present, and these large spiky pollen grains may get attached with the wings, with the bristles on their abdomen, or with the pouches in their legs. And these are getting attached with their body, means pollen grains get attached with the body of the insects, whether they can attach with the wings or body bristles, or even in case of bees or wasps, we have certain pouches around their legs. So some of the pollen grains may fall into those pouches. And when after drinking nectar, these insects are coming up, so they prefer to climb up the carpel. So they will climb up the wall of the ovary, style, and ultimately reach the stigma. Stigma is sticky. When they start to take off from the stigma surface, they flap their wings. So some of the pollen grains, they happen to fall on the stigma of the same flower. And some pollen grains still attached with the insects. They will be flying with the insect and reaching to the stigma of the same species flower in the surrounding. Now, in that case, petal height is always larger than the height of the petal, height of the stamen, and height of the carpel. So that is a protective function. That along with the attraction, along with the sport of pollination, it is also a protective function as well. And again, pollen grains are produced small in number. Why? Because pollination success rate is high. So large number of pollen grain production is not much required. So in case of insect pollination, insect pollinated flowers have got large, brightly colored petals. Flowers are fragrant. They produce nectar. Nectar guides on the petal, guide the insects to reach the nectar, and large spiky pollen grains get attached to their body surface, and these pollen grains drop off over the sticky stigma. Now, when it comes around to wind pollination, as insects are not required to be attracted, so these flowers do not have brightly colored petals. They do have colored petals, but they are dull colored, means they are not a source of attraction. And at the same time, these flowers are non-fragrant, means they do not produce any odor, they do not produce any nectar. Rather, petal height is even smaller than the height of stamen and carpel. Why? Because pollen grains are to be dispersed in the air, and carpels have to take up the pollen grains from the air. So these stamens and carpels must be well exposed to the surface, well exposed to the winds around. So in that case, we can find in certain flowers, means stamens hanging out of the flower, carpels hanging out of the flower, just like pendulum. So we name them as pendulous. Pollen grains that are produced in the anthers, they are produced in large number. They are very small, so that their density should be lighter, and they can float at larger distances even in the still air. And the carpel has stigma that is provided with the hair-like extensions. That's why we call it either feathery or brushy. That is increasing the surface area because it has to catch pollen grains floating in the air. In order to ensure the success rate of the pollination process, large number of pollen grains are produced because most of the pollen grains are likely to be wasted. Why? Because they would be falling on the ground, they would be dropping on the tree trunks, on the leaves, or they could be falling on the stigma of irrelevant species. Hardly a very few percentage of them would be able to reach the right stigma. So that's why, in order to make sure that a little bit pollination is completed, so that's why these pollen grains are produced in large number. Now, once the pollination process is completed, what we further have? We have to see how fertilization takes place. So pollen grains, when they drop on the stigma surface, they absorb moisture from the stigma surface, and that results in expansion of these pollen grains. Their internal volume starts increasing and expansion pressure is there. Wall of the pollen grain that is intact with the stigma surface that becomes soft, and a cytoplasmic extension grows down into the style region, and this cytoplasmic extension is known as pollen tube. Meanwhile, the pollen grain had a nucleus that had already divided into two nuclei. One nucleus that is close to the tip of the pollen tube, it is known as tube nucleus, are also known as vegetative nucleus. This vegetative nucleus, or what we call tube nucleus, is responsible for the release of enzymes in the style that will digest away the style contents, producing gap, and that gap helps this pollen tube to grow down towards the ovary. Whereas the other nucleus that follows the tube nucleus, it is known as generative nucleus, and it remains silent and inactive throughout the process when pollen tube is growing down towards the ovary. When the pollen tube reaches the ovary and it reaches the opening of the ovule that is known as micropyle, further growth of pollen tube stops, tube nucleus disintegrates, and generative nucleus immediately divides to raise two nuclei. These nuclei are known as male gamete nuclei or sperm nuclei. When these sperm nuclei are produced, pollen tube bursts at its tips, and these male gametes enter the ovule through micropyle. One of the male gamete nucleus will fertilize with the ovum nucleus, and the other male gamete will fertilize with the endosperm nucleus. As two fertilization processes are occurring simultaneously, so we call it double fertilization. After the successful completion of fertilization, changes do occur within the flower, means petals, stamens, style, stigma, they drop off. Within the ovary, the ovum nucleus after fertilization develops into zygote, and zygote develops into embryo, and this embryo is enclosed as tiny plant within the seed. Endosperm nucleus after fertilization, it develops into endosperm tissue. This endosperm tissue stores food inside in the form of starch, proteins, and fats. Ovule transforms into seed, and ovule wall transforms into seed wall, that is later known as testa. Ovary enlarges, and that transforms into fruit. Whereas ovary wall transforms into fruit wall, that is also known as apicarp or pericarp. The rest of the flower structures, they either dry up and drop off. Now, the seeds that are produced inside the fruit, these are the offsprings of the plants. And these seeds are actually to develop, to germinate into a whole new plant. But these seeds are produced as dormant with hardly 20% of moisture inside. And this moisture is sufficient enough to keep the embryo alive, but insufficient to support any metabolic activity or support any activation of enzymes. And this is to ensure that all the metabolic activities leading to germination only occur when the required germination conditions are provided. but these seeds need to be dispersed away from the parent plant. Why parent plants need their offsprings, their seeds to be dispersed away? Because their parent plants, they want to avoid any overcrowding in the area. They want their seeds to germinate into new areas, new habitats, new localities. They want to prevent any disease erupting due to overcrowding, right? And they want to prevent any possible competition of the baby plants with their parent grown up plants. So that's why seed dispersion is important, and the parent plants want their seeds to be dispersed away from them. Dispersion may be supported by two mechanisms. One is known as animal dispersion, and the other is known as wind dispersion. In case of animal dispersion, there are two possibilities. One, animal feeds on the pulp present inside the fruit, and it throws away the seed to some distance away from the parent plant. Sometimes seeds are very much small in size, so these animals swallow these seeds. Seeds travel throughout the length of the digestive system of that animal. When to some larger distance that animal defecates, so seeds are also dispersed along with the fecal material. It may be a bit benefit to these seeds as well, because moisture in the feces will provide the immediate moisture to these seeds to start germination process. And by the moment baby plants erupt over the soil surface, the fecal material would have decomposed to increase the soil fertility. In certain other cases, animals are not consuming the fruit, rather fruit are the seeds. They are spiny or they are spiky. They get attached with the surface, with the skin surface of the animals. And when these animals are moving at distance from the parent plants, so these seeds might be dispersed away. Means animal is not concerned with that fruit, that it is likely to eat that fruit, but it's not even the fruit that can be taken as a food by these animals. But when animals are passing along these plants, brushing along these plants, so their seeds or their fruits get attached with their bodies. And when they move to some distance and they start walking, or they start running, or they shake their bodies, so seeds are dispersed away from the parent plant. The second mechanism is wind dispersion. In that case, fruit does not contain any pulp inside, so means that is not a source of food for the animals, but rather it is highly packed with the light seeds inside. When the seeds ripe up, the fruit pod that bursts open, sometimes with a little explosion, and these seeds are thrown away in the air. If there is wind blowing in any particular direction, so that wind disperses away the seeds from the parent plant. And if there are still winds, seeds will be thrown in the air and they will be falling sideways around, but a bit distant from the parent plant. So this is known as the seed dispersion. When we talk about the structure of the seed, so we have an example of broad bean seed, that is also known as kidney bean. It has got a very hard coating around, that is known as testa, that is protective, and it keeps this seed protected till it gains the germination conditions. Inside the seed, what we have got maximum space occupied by the endosperm that has this food store for the germination process. And we have the embryo, that is the tiny plant consisting of three segments. One is radicle that will develop into root during germination, lomule that will develop into shoot during germination, and a pouch-like structure known as cotyledon that encloses inside two baby leaves that will spread open when exposed to the light, and they will start photosynthesis. A depression in the kidney bean that is known as hilus, and within that depression there is a little opening known as micropyle, and this micropyle will allow water and oxygen to enter during germination process. Now, we are going to discuss about seed germination. Seed germination requires certain conditions, and the conditions include: there must be an appropriate season for the seeds to germinate. There must be suitable moisture, particularly with a suitable soil. appropriate optimum pH of the soil, optimum temperature or suitable temperature, and oxygen supply within the soil, because during germination process embryo cells will be respiring and they will be using oxygen. Now seeds are sown in the soil, and soil has got higher water potential compared to the seeds. And remember one thing, when the seeds are provided with the germination conditions, we specifically call them seedlings. So the seedlings have got lower water potential compared to the surrounding soil. So water enters from the soil into the seeds through micropyle. This not only increases the volume inside the seed, but it provides a sufficient moisture that will activate the enzymes in the endosperm. Endosperm has enzymes that get activated after the moisture is sufficient inside, and these enzymes start digesting starch, proteins, and fats into their simple components like reducing sugars like glucose, amino acids, and fatty acids. And these are to be absorbed by the cells of the embryo that will be respiring on them, and that will be using them to increase the number of cells. Now, embryo cells need to respire, and for respiration, they need glucose that they get from the starch digestion in the endosperm, but oxygen they get from the surrounding. And this oxygen also enters the seeds while in the dissolved form in the water through micropyle. Meanwhile, there is an expansion internally going on, and that causes an expansion pressure over the testa, and the testa also becomes soft because of continuous exposure to the moisture around. So due to expansion pressure, testa bursts, and this helps the embryo to grow out of the seed. First of all, a radicle grows out of the seed through micropyle, and it starts going down towards the gravity. It has to develop into future root. It is immediately followed by the plumule that keeps growing up towards the soil surface, towards the light. And along with this plumule, cotyledon pouch is also carried along. When this plumule reaches the soil surface and emerges over the soil surface and is exposed to light, the cotyledon pouch ruptures and the baby leaves, they spread open, they start photosynthesis. Meanwhile, roots had developed and they start absorbing minerals and water from the soil. In the initial few days of germination, seedling's mass is increasing because it is absorbing water from the surrounding. But after a few days, its mass gradually decreases because most of the carbohydrates in the endosperms are being respired, and respiratory products like carbon dioxide and water are escaping into the surrounding. But once the seedling appears on the surface and starts photosynthesis, further loss in mass is reduced. Rather, the seedling now start gaining more mass because photosynthesis is resulting in the production of food. Now the new plant has developed, has emerged over the soil surface. So my dear students, this was all about the sexual reproduction in plants, and during this discussion we discussed about the structure of the flower, we discussed about the pollination in their types, we discussed about the structural adaptations of wind pollinated flowers and insect pollinated flowers. We also discussed the germination of pollen tube, fertilization and post-fertilization changes. We also discussed the structure of seed dispersion and its significance, and we also discussed how the seeds are germinating into a whole new plant. Thank you very much, and stay tuned for further updates and for further lectures.